Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, African heads of state pledged to work more closely together to push back against armed extremists operating on the continent. Security, corruption and trade deals are on the agenda for the African Union's annual summit this year, held in Mauritania. Also, France's president also heads to Nouakchott to meet with the G5 there. Emmanuel Macron calls for more security collaboration with African allies as an Al-Qaeda-linked group claims responsibility for a fatal bombing of French soldiers in Mali. And Rwanda faces an escalating trade war on second-hand clothes. The government increased import duties a couple of years back, upsetting an industry worth millions of dollars. But first, moving forward with a free trade area for Africa, reform of the African Union and corruption were on the agenda for leaders from the continent as they met in Nouakchott for the African Union's summit. That wrapped up in the Mauritanian capital on Monday. Security was also central to talks. Heads of state have pledged to work more closely together to tackle extremism, particularly in the Sahel. France's president was also in Nouakchott to discuss counter-terrorism strategy with the bloc. Illustrating the shared risk posed by militants, on Monday an Al-Qaeda-linked group claimed responsibility for the suicide bombing of French troops in Mali on Sunday. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Wounded civilians in Gao's hospital. Sunday's attack left 4 people dead. Several French soldiers were also injured. An Al-Qaeda-linked group claimed responsibility for the attack. French President Emmanuel Macron attended the African Union summit in Mauritania, where events in Gao and in the Sahel were high on the agenda.
Several French soldiers were wounded. They're being sent to France. And Malian and African civilians were killed by terrorists. They are the first victims of these barbarians that we are fighting.
Jihadists also killed 10 soldiers in Niger over the weekend. Faced with these attacks, the G5 Sahel, which comprises Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad and Mali, says it needs more financial pledges.
For this mission, we're like beggars, running around the world asking for funding of just 423 million euros. Yet, in some areas of the world, there are daily bombings that cost €1 billion. It doesn't make sense.
Chad's President Idriss Déby criticized the international community.
The G5 Sahel force lacks funding and means. It suffers from the Security Council's decisions. The Security Council is refusing to give us a strong mandate.
France supports the G5 Sahel force. French Operation Barkhane has 4,000 troops in the region. But with all the recent attacks, analysts say Barkhane might stay in the Sahel for a long time. Earlier this year, the head of the French army said Mali's problems would probably take 10 to 15 years to solve.
A look now at some news in brief. Thousands of police officers in northeastern Nigeria protested on Monday, demanding months of back pay. Members of the mobile police unit working in areas targeted by Boko Haram extremists during their insurgency say that they're owed up to 6 months' salary and are also calling for better accommodation when manning checkpoints and sent out on patrol with the military. Roads around police headquarters in Maiduguri were blocked by the rally. Witnesses say shots were fired in the air and tear gas released by demonstrators. Both sides in South Sudan civil war are accusing each other of having launched attacks that violate the latest peace deal. The army claims that rebels attacked Maban in Upper Nile State on Sunday, whilst the rebels say that their forces were first heavily bombarded by the military. 18 civilians were killed in the violence. South Sudan seen 4.5 years of brutal conflict between forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and those backing opposition leader Riek Machar. And there have been angry reactions in Uganda over a new tax on social media. In addition to the usual data fees, users of sites like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn will now have to pay about 4 centimes for access. The levy will be deducted by service providers that will then pay the government revenue service. Human rights organisations are fiercely critical of the attempt to curtail freedom of speech. The government hopes to collect around 86 million euros in taxes from the move. DR Congo is hoping to make it through to the end of a 3-week incubation period with no discoveries of new cases of Ebola and so be declared free of the disease. WHO medics identified and followed up with people who may have come into contact with a person infected by the virus. Surveillance on that front has wrapped up and the wait continues. About 1,706 contacts were identified. Now, Rwanda is facing an ongoing trade war on second-hand clothing. In 2016, the government increased import duties on used clothes, upsetting an industry worth millions of dollars. Take a look.
In this market in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, traders sell second-hand clothes, mostly cast-offs from Americans. Business was booming until 2016, when the government hiked import tariffs on used clothes. Now they struggle to make a living.
It's hard to find second-hand clothes to spare. It's hard to make money. Before, with 5,000 francs, you could buy 15 items of clothing and resell them for 20,000. It paid for our children's schooling, their clothes and their food.
East Africa accounts for around 13% of global imports of second-hand clothes. The industry employs 350,000 people, with the bulk of clothes coming from the United States. President Paul Kagame blames these imports for blocking growth in Rwanda's nascent textile industry.
Rwanda has a clear industrialization strategy, and from this point of view, it is quite reasonable to set up a form of protectionism that could eventually benefit the local industry.
Facing rising prices for imported clothes, some consumers are turning to made-in-Rwanda alternatives. In the capital's cultural district, up to 20 local designers have opened stores to showcase their production.
Instead of buying a used cloth in the market and the same price, you can afford what is new and locally made. So it's a pride also to have a made in Rwanda in your wardrobe.
While Rwanda's burgeoning garment industry looks to gain from the change, in the meantime, it is ordinary Rwandans, buyers and sellers of second-hand clothes, who continue to suffer.
Near Lake Turkana, northern Kenya, differences were set aside over the weekend as 14 ethnic communities in Marsabit County got together to celebrate this year's 11th Marsabit Lake Turkana Culture Festival in Loyangalani.
Festival is great. It brings people together. It unites community. It shows how communities are united.
People are brought together. There is that cohesion and integration among the communities to ensure that it helps us bring down the level of animosity. Sometimes there's been cattle rustling and fighting over resources here and there. This one minimizes this kind of things.
Well, around the same time each year, the small fishing town comes alive for a 3-day event that celebrates local culture and diversity and to build better relationships between the tribes. We'll leave you with images of the celebration. That's all we have time for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
You are here, your programme spotlighting French heritage.
Versailles, the Louvre, Mont Saint-Michel are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius, Anne France, harbours many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24, discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.